So, hello everyone. Let me start with the question who I am. Not an existential musing, but because I don't presume that everybody knows me or where I came from, the Philippines, except probably having one of the worst leaders, nation leaders in the world, Duterte, who has so far in his 4-year tenure as a president already has a groundbreaking record of over 20,000 drug-related extrajudicial killings, 263 peasants and peasant advocates killed, over 100 right defenders killed, including well-known peasant advocates such as Randy Achanis, tortured with 40 stabs before the heart, and recent forced evacuations and bombings. The varieties, which intensified, of course, during COVID-19 pandemic. Aside from this, I am Roselle Pineda, a PhD creative arts student from the archipelagic island of the Philippines, on the other side of the Pacific. Mabuhay. So that's a touristic welcome for everybody. I also have an artist residency space, which I run, located in the municipality of Dingalan, Aurora, where my community collaborators for my PhD, the indigenous peoples, Dumagat, is also located. So at this point, allow me to show you a global challenges video, which I produced in 2019, which will kind of summarize my PhD work and my proposal. You can see that Professor Sarah Miller was still my principal supervisor at the time, but this should give you a context, the location, and the creative curatorial work, the Dumagat Day Festival, which I'm working on for the PhD.
Sa lahat ng mga Pilipino, talagang kailangan.
This is one of the elders which I'm working with.
Limutin. Kung saan-saan na pamayanan, namuang ilong, igurot, pinakikipaglaban nila, halos mamatay na sila. Ay, ganoon din sana ang gusto namin, na huwag makuha yung kultura ng katutubo.
Yan na din ni makijabat. On potok na yan na din ni makijabat. On potok na yan na din ni makijabat. On potok ng lupang nilikha ni makijabat.
So this is the Dumagat Day Festival, which I curated
para sa mga dumagat sa pusod ng Sierra Madre, tahimik ang aming daigdig. Nang dumating ang mga gahaman, dala ay ligali.
Cultural research is inherently linked in the economic and political development of these communities. These gatherings are important tools in resisting cultural erasures and in empowering these communities to effectively contend with the changes in their lives and in their environment.
However, during the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, our area went on a total lockdown and Australia imposed an overseas travel ban and everything got cancelled. Until on April 15, 2020, I received reports that our community is being militarized. The incident prompted me to rethink and pursue the Dumagat Festival as a creative way of responding to this condition by turning it into a radio program festival so that we can still bring out community stories amidst lockdown. From here, the new PhD creative work, Adone Dumagat 2020 KKK, was born. So you're listening to the station ID, which we composed for the radio program.
Kwento, kultura at kalusugan. Kwento, kultura at kalusugan.
So, Kwento Kultura Kalusugan means community stories, culture, and community health. So that's where the theme revolved around the theme of the radio program. And you are looking now at the 6 posters of the 6 episodes which we produced during lockdown from May 9 to June 2020. I know this is a rather long contextualization and background of the story, but a necessary one in order to understand the impetus of the various conversations in DOCULEKTIV, which I'm hoping you were able to watch. I shared the links. DOCULEKTIV, as was discussed in my text, was primarily prompted by the idea of publicly sharing the process by which we, me and my AARPS collective, shaped and implemented the radio program festival. But it quickly transformed as an archival project and a curatorial exercise in presenting those archived questions and conversations and the process of creative collaboration. Here is a clip of one of the episodes of DOCULEKTIV. It's the 2nd episode called Discomfort Zones, wherein we discuss the many intersections of comfort and discomfort during the time of pandemic and how we communicate with each other.
Discomfort.
Comfort, at the same time, discomfort. May comfort sa grupong to.
Discomfort sa ating available.
Comfort zone, comfort, discomfort zone, comfort, discomfort zone, comfort, discomfort zone, comfort, discomfort, comfort zone, comfort zone, comfort and discomfort.
Comfort and discomfort. Comfort.
Comfort and discomfort. Comfort and discomfort. Discomfort.
Comfort, discomfort. Comfort, discomfort.
Discomfort zone. Discomfort. Comfort, discomfort.
Discomfort and comfort. Discomfort.
Comfort.
Discomfort zone.
Discomfort. Not comfortable. Discomfort. 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 Discomfort.
We understand.
So I actually didn't include a clip of one of the most discomfortable moments in the conversation because I kind of shussed my principal supervisors in one of the episodes because his children were noisy in the background. But so I will leave some time for the discussion since both the work and the process of the work is not only multi-layered but also riddled with meta conversations as well. Certainly, there were many moments of crying, laughter, and pauses in betweens. But let me end this presentation by emphasizing the last statement in my text, which I distributed, which says, the many different publics can engage with DOCULEKTIV in a multitude ways. One, as an archival data of the radio program, which we produced during lockdown. Two, as a conversation about artistic practices and research, specifically in the context of collective collaboration and curation and collaborative making and community arts and ethics that's involved in it. But three, it is also a conversation in itself about loss, about uncertainties, about fatigue, about love, trust, and care, about solidarity and social engagement, about politics, about anchor, about the strange paradoxical situation we are in, about being in this moment, and about becoming into the moment, an action of what needs to be done. In any case, DOCULEKTIV can be taken as a curious dialogue, a decentralized action, and a friendly provocation at the time of catastrophes. Namaste. Thank you.
Thank you, Roselle. And there's this, your work is such a compressed box of so many different strands and directions and things that we could go in and explore. And I think that I partly, as we were talking last week, I partly see my role as a bit of a someone as a go-between, as I know aspects of your practice and these projects you've been doing, compared to our collective who've gathered here today who might not know about it at all. And I'm trying to have empathy with them and what they need to know about all of the multiple strands of your work. So that the first thing that, people might find useful to go into in more depth in relation to your stuff is the question around your role as a curator. So I guess this a fairly standard cultural understanding of what a curator is somebody who, like a kind of fancified version of an exhibition organizer, who chooses artworks to put into a gallery and where they will hang and that kind of stuff. So you're doing a PhD as a creative researcher, as from the point of view of your practice as a curator, but you're collaborating with communities well beyond the comfort zone of traditional cultural institutions. So I guess what I'm interested in, exploring a bit further is how you, what does that mean? What does it mean to be a curator who's collaborating with an indigenous community in the Philippines to support the presentation of a festival in a small community?
Yeah, so I'm drawing my idea of curatorship from largely performance performance curation, which is an emerging kind of practice and also a field of study globally, in relation to, for example, contemporary curation, in which the temporal is kind of a key element and a key question in kind of organizing how we think about gatherings and participatory art, for example, in the urban context. But at the same time, but at the same time, a very interesting concept of curation is that it comes from the word curare, which is a Latin word for care. So in traditional terms, curare and care basically talks about the care or the custodians for materials, but specifically and especially in contemporary art and contemporary curation, this has already gone beyond the materials. We know this as practitioners, and I'm thinking about curare and curation in relation to tending relationships as well, more than maybe not more than, but I'm not a white cube curator. So tending relationships and tending to how people are engaging, how people in a collective are engaging, and of course their ethical responsibility with the communities that they work with. A lot of contemporary curators, and I'm sure you know this, Lucas, from the City Biennale, a lot of contemporary artists also, we sometimes call them parachute artists, in which they go to communities and then they do their own little performance, workshop, and then they leave. And then at the time of their leaving, the question of what happens to the community remains unanswered. And so I am kind of shaping my idea of curation from two ideas of immersion. So I call it immersive curation. The first immersion context is in the context of community work, which is a kind of participatory qualitative research method in community development and community organizing, in which artists, researchers, organizers really live in the community in order to kind of know the rhythm, the context, and the conditions, and what it takes, and the community goals, and their aspirations, in order to be able to put that in the work. And on the other side of that, I'm also invoking two kinds of immersive conversations that that I implore in my curatorial work. And I usually have uncomfortability in talking about this, but I draw from two philosophical ideas of dialectics, Hegelian sublation and Aufheben, and also delusion, the idea of delusion intercapturing, which is kind of briefly an idea of how ideas turn into a kind of becoming, from being to becoming. So it's very much attuned to how ideas are developed in the context of collaborative work. So those are the two immersive curations, two ideas of immersion that I'm thinking when I think about immersive curation. And that I think is very important, and that has played a lot of role, for example, in how I was able to kind of rethink about the festival at a distance. And I was curating it from Australia, and I was talking to my community 100 miles away from me, and they don't even have signal in that area. And so there's a lot that figure in the curation of the festival that came from my 3-year long living and immersion in the community. And so those conversations figured in the radio program. For example, one of the most touching conversations we had by the Dumagat community. So we interviewed them by phone. By the Dumagat community was this aspiration to become free. So they were describing how is it that their lives were affected by the lockdown, being a semi-nomadic indigenous peoples group who was used to walking in the vast ancestral lands where there's water and there's the Pacific Ocean, in which they can spear fish anytime. And at the same time, on the other side of that, the vast Sierra Madre mountain ranges, and that's all part of their ancestral lands. But that all changed during lockdown, and it was a very touching conversation about the aspiration to be free, to be able to walk again and swim and talk to the other members of the communities after COVID-19. But there's also an interesting multi-layered valuation and metaphor there, because they're a betel nut chewing culture. So they were saying, if it's up to them, they're gonna chew and spit on COVID any time of the day, so that it would go away. But at the same time, this is a very interesting metaphor, because Duterte, our really fascist president, has also used the metaphor of spitting on COVID-19 in really implementing one of the worst COVID plans, so that we are now experiencing 500,000 cases in just a matter of a few months. So there's a lot of those conversations that are happening with on the level of the national discourse and language, and also on the level of the indigenous community grassroots discourse. So I guess that's where the curatorial work comes in. In one of the papers that I published about community curation, I kind of call myself a facilitator, kind of an articulator, because there are languages to be bridged between communities, and for example, not limited to, but for example, certain access to being able to access their rights to their ancestral lands. So institutional language like the law, funding agencies, but I'm not a very good funding facilitator. I'm very independent. I was thinking about that when Sarah was presenting, because I'm through and through gangster independent artist. So all my funding come from my pocket.
So Roselle, can I just jump in there and just thinking about your relationship with the Dumagat community there and your role as a curator. The festival that they have annually there, which you're involved in, and obviously this year had to take place in a completely different way. I'm just curious about, from their point of view, perhaps in terms of your role as a facilitator, from the point of view of that Indigenous community, how do they see you? Like, what do they use you for? Like, how are you useful to them in being in relationship with you?
Actually, the artist residency started first as a laboratory for site-specific works that I was working on. But I think one of the organizers knew me and my work related to art and performance, because I was a dramaturg and a director as well. And so they invited me actually to kind of help them curate the first Dumagat festival. And they had, and from there we kind of so I facilitated some platforms of consultation with them in order to understand what their aspirations are, what they want, why the festival. There's so many indigenous festivals in the Philippines. Why now, and why? I guess I am kind of a facilitator, but at the same time, a facilitator into kind of translating those raw aspirations and goals and community goals into some kind of a language, into a different language. In this case, a festival. So that's my role. I don't think they see me as a rich philanthropist. I think they see me as ma'am, so they call me ma'am, or like equal to a professor, because they knew that I was doing the PhD. I had to I had to let them know because of my ethics approval process. But at first they didn't know that I was when I started the curatorial work with them, they didn't know that I teach at the university. But now they call me ma'am.
Roselle, there's you mentioned ethics, and then there's also the question around your collaboration with the DOCULEKTIV group. I'm just curious about checking with Travis about time, whether it might be useful to open up to questions from others as well. I have questions, but others might want to jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in and ask if anyone has any questions. To jump in now, with whether you want to do that by voice or by chat. But I also sense that, Lucas, you've got some more questions here. So you're also welcome to continue the discussion. I can't see anything coming through. So Lucas, if you want to continue.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So
wants to be unethical.
We might get around to ethics if people are interested in that. I was kind of interested also in in some ways this is a story about what people do during the lockdown interruption, or the theme of today is around interruptions, and how that forces you to pull back and reconsider your approach and work together in different ways. And your group has, which is the AARPS collective, has not just, this is my reading of it, you use Zoom meetings as a way of collectively organising your interaction with the Dumagat community and this radio version of your festival. But somehow that has become a thing in itself. Like the interactions in the community through those Zoom calls have become an integral part of this new sort of artwork, which looks a bit like what we're doing right here today, but with an extra layer of self-consciousness layered on top of it.
Yeah, it's a curated, we call it a curated conversation. It's an archive. It's generally an archive. We started documenting our conversations, but we're not very comfortable. I am not very comfortable about talking to people, especially in those times. I'm so sorry to my supervisors. I'm really not. I really just didn't feel like talking to anyone at that time. But we were archiving. We were archiving a lot, and I also didn't like really the idea of performance and presenting anything that is kind of well thought out, because it's not. It's the pandemic has brought us into so many paradoxical situations in which, like Lacan says, the real and reality is kind of all messed up together. And so we have to put all that into consideration when it comes to actually talking to people. And so in the DOCULEKTIV, we kind of edited. So it's an edited, curated conversations, meta conversations from all those different Zoom gatherings that we have. And we were crying a lot because it's a pandemic. I'm working distance away from my family. And it's almost like a hobby for us to cry. And you've witnessed this firsthand, Dr. Lucas, in one of our talk backs when we really cried. And we laughed, and I scolded you for your noisy children, and I'm sorry for that again. So it's that kind of reality. It's that kind of being able to put in all that kind of reality into the aesthetics of how we communicate at this point. And that's why even when Sarah was presenting a while ago, I was really interested in the way she was saying, for example, that her shooting dates would be postponed because of the pandemic. But I was interested also in how this pandemic has kind of shifted a lot of the aesthetics of how we think about video presentation and online presentation and conversations and gatherings. And I think, and we call the gatherings Daster Discourse. Daster is a typical house dress in Filipino, in which we all kind of, today I presented myself well. I kind of dressed not in a duster or in a house dress, but usually it's that. We discourse, we think about processes while we're baking, while we're cooking, while their children are noisy. And that's all become part of the aesthetics. It's a very interesting bricolage. And I see a lot of actually Australian web series that talk about bricolage and that look at bricolage as kind of an aesthetic tool for making new series.
Roselle, Kath McKinnon is in her duster at her house, and she's put her hand up to ask you a question.
I'm not sure it's very well formulated, Roselle. I'm sorry about that, but I found it all really fascinating. And I sort of find it really interesting that this idea of conversation has come in as a way of replacing performance. It's actually not just with COVID, because recently in some of in the novel form, conversation, there's been a few conversation novels. There's a woman called Rachel Cusk who's put out a whole lot of conversation novels that kind of, there's no drama is what people might say. And I think it's just a really interesting, because of COVID and because of the way we are, the conversations become important again. And so it's got roots back to other things, like your sense that you're saying, we can't plan, we can't do anything, just be in the moment. One uses what one has in the moment. So I just wondered how that's going to frame your research, in terms of maybe thinking back to more discursive kinds of things that have happened that might reframe this creative project and your process.
So ever since working with the community, and I'm an activist for a long time, I have this, so there's immersive curation as kind of the principle for the curation, but there's also, I call, fluid methodology. So it's always been fluid ever since. So I actually didn't have much kind of adjustments in the way I look at things, and that's probably the reason why I was able to come up with the radio program, because I was always thinking about things in a fluid manner. Because in community work, you cannot plan that much. I was having a lot of conflicts, for example, with ethics review process, because the ethics review process is kind of asking me to have this and this and this and this and this and this and this kind of documents to produce, and I couldn't because the community didn't want to. The Dumagat community document. But so it's always been that kind of fluidity in the methodology that I've been employing ever since. So so this is how I think it figured in more than transforming the principles and methodologies of my former PhD work. I think it was actually highlighted more in this work, because I had to be more fluid and more keen in this one, because I wasn't talking to the community directly. I wasn't talking to them regularly. So I had to figure in so many factors. Jane Bennett or even Deleuze calls this an assemblage of figures, of actants, in the way I see the many factors that come in the curatorial process. So so that's, did I answer the question? I think a bit. I think a bit. I didn't really transform it. It was highlighted more